Gospel, chapter 14, from verse 12 through to verse 24. John 14, verse 12 to 24.
Most assuredly, I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also. And greater works than these he will do, because I go to my Father. And whatsoever you ask in my name, that will I do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask anything in my name, I will do it. If you love me, keep my commandments. And I will pray the Father, and he will give you another helper, that he may abide with you forever. The Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him or knows him. But you know him, for he dwells with you, and will be with you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. A little while longer, and the world will see me no more. But you will see me, because I live. You will live also. At that day you will know that I am in the Father, and you in me, and I in you. He who has my commandments and keeps them, it is he who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved of my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him. Judas, not Iscariot, said to him, Lord, how is it that you will manifest yourself to us, and not to the world? Jesus answered and said to him, If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and he will come to him and make our home with him. He who does not love me does not keep my words, and the word which you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me.
Where's my notes from? There they are. Panic every time when you forget that what we normally do is have a little bit of rhythm and let's see. The context of what we're looking at today is that Jesus has been telling the disciples in chapter 13, right towards the end of the chapter, that he is going to leave. And it's not a case of him going to leave, he has to leave. And so he expresses or explains a little about what's going to happen in the very near future for the disciples. And it caused dismay, it caused questions to be asked that they wanted to know about this, that and the other. If he was going, why couldn't they go with him, and all those type of situations. And it's in that context that Jesus is speaking to the disciples now of what's going to happen when he goes. And so he speaks to them. In verse 15, it just simply, I think we're just going to look at about 4 verses today. In verse 15, it says simply this: if you love me, keep my commandments. There's a great tendency when we hear of people saying that they love this, or they love her, or they love him, or they love God, that it's expressed in New Testament terms in the sense of obedience. That's the way that love is fully expressed. That does not mean that there's no emotion in it at all. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that there can be emotion in it, and there's right that there's emotion in it. But the love that God is speaking of here is a love that where you make a decision about what you're going to do. If you love me, keep my commandments. John expresses himself a little later in one of his letters, in 1 John chapter 5, verses 2 and 3, and he says, this is the love of God, that you keep his commandments. And his commandments are not grievous, as it says in the King James Version, or are not burdensome, as it says in the New King James Version. Can you remember when our brother David James Morse would be with us? Though he had all this ability to talk in various languages, I think he could speak 7 languages all told. And he could do the telegraph crossword in 20 minutes, which used to do my head in more than the languages. But he used to talk about, with all his understanding of language and words, Can you remember, he would almost every sermon use this phrase, that the Christian's walk with God is a love relationship. He always used to use that phrase. It's a love relationship. There were a number of things that he always emphasized, that the greatest gift that you could receive once you're a Christian is the peace of God. Without peace, he said, you cannot operate. Without peace of God resting within your soul, there is no way you can fulfill what God wants in your life. Because you're panicking. Is the thing you're doing right? Do you feel guilty about it? And all those different things. But the other matter that he would always bring to our attention was this. Christianity, in your relationship with God, is a love relationship. And his commandments are not grievous. They are not a burden to us. In the psalmist, whichever the psalmist is that wrote Psalm 119, in verse 143 it says this, your commandments are my delights. Your commandments are pleasant. That's what it literally means. Your commandments are pleasant to me. They're not a burden to me at all. And Job, speaking along similar lines, says in these types of terms, your word to me is more important to me than my necessary food. There is something about God's word, of doing his commands, that expresses the love of God in a very real way. And so he sets out that when I leave you, you need to fulfill this now. If you love me, keep my commandments. And then it quickly goes on then, almost with a change of subject, but it's the basis of the love relationship that he says the next words. And he says, and I will pray the Father, and he will give you another comforter, and he will abide with you forever. Verses 13 to 14 talks about the Christian asking the Lord. Verses 13 and 14. It's talking, the phrase that is being used is talking of one who is inferior, speaking to one who is superior, and leaving it to him to do as he pleases, to answer as he sees fit. Now that's the prayer of verse 13 and 14 that Margaret read at the outset. Here it's different. It's not an inferior speaking to a superior. It is one who is on an equal level. In fact, the one translator puts it this way. It is a most tender and delicate expression, and I will pray the Father. He is not speaking as one inferior. He is speaking as one who is on equal terms. And so we have this confidence in Jesus' prayer. I can't find one prayer that was ever turned down by God to him. Because he was on equal terms. In fact, the Father says to him in the Psalms, he says, ask of me and I'll give you the nations. The sense of confidence that Jesus had in his prayers, in his relationship with God the Father, is a relationship that comes out in this way. He is not an inferior speaking to a superior and leaving it in his hands as to what he does with the answer, but it is one who is of equal level there, on a same playing field. And it's a very delicate, a very tender expression that is used. I will pray the Father. Then he goes on to say that he'll give you another comforter. Now the problem is, if you notice sometimes that you have friends or you have relatives or you have people around, that when they're around, you feel safer. I can remember when I first passed my first aid in the Tarplant, and we had a junior first aid team that became national champions. We were quite chuffed. I remember winning the regional. You had 4 in a team, and I was number 3. And I in the regional context that we were over in the Polytechnic, which is now Pontypridd or Glamorgan University, the fella there because they dress up and they make up and everything, and he had a stroke. Now I didn't know he had a stroke. I hadn't progressed that far. It doesn't say much about becoming regional champion, does it? But I remember that when they teach you what to do when the patient that you find is unconscious. And so I went through the normal jargon that you would use, expressing the different things. And I said, and this is how literal it is. I said, I'll check if he's got any foreign bodies in his mouth or false teeth. And if they have, I'll remove them. And the judge who was standing by my side said, well, go on then. So in they went and out they come. And I remember putting it down, and at the end he said, you did very well, but can I suggest one thing? The next time you take someone's teeth out, don't put it in the dust in the corner of the room, put it in a bit of lint. He's still spitting it out. I can remember when I passed my first aid test, and both the senior team and junior team left the tar plant to go down to be measured up for blazes. And I can remember the feeling of insecurity that came, because neither Fred Palmer was there nor Dennis Smith was there, who were the two senior first aiders. If anybody came in now, it was down to me. And it brought that tension. Remember old Ray Morgan came in. He was the blacksmith welder. I got something in my eye, man. I muttered to myself, if you think I'm going to roll your eyelid back, you've got another thing coming. But that's what they do, isn't it? They roll it back and oh, no. So I said, put your eye over this, right? There's a little wash bottle. So I just squeeze it like that and squeeze it. And I said, is that better? He said, well, nothing happened really, man. So I squeezed it and I almost blew his head off. Oh, that's better, he said. And out he went. He said the road to this day, if he was a better foot. I felt so much better when they come back into the room. Made such a difference. And this is the type of thing that Jesus is speaking of here. When I leave you, I understand it's going to be difficult. I understand that. And so we can be in situations, like the disciples, where we feel isolated. And he said, now I will pray the Father, and he will give you another. That word another is so precious in this little phrase that Jesus used. It means this: one of equal sort, of equal quality, one like myself. That's what he's saying. I will pray the Father, and he will give you one like myself, another of equal sort. Now, in the context of what the disciples are doing, this is going to be a great help to them. But I'm sure if we were to read between the lines of the gospel accounts, the disciples always seemed better when Jesus was around. Always seemed better when Jesus was around. When you're left to conduct a meeting by yourself, it's a far difference from when you've got someone. When I asked Phil to do a service when I knew both Neil and myself would be up, I felt I was caught between two, because I know what it's like to feel, well, the two that are responsible for it are not here. And it brings that tension there. But it helps us to bring a dependence, really, upon the Lord, to have a confidence in ourselves, in one sense, of seeing that God can work through us. And so he speaks to them and says, listen now, he will give you one just like myself, of equal sort, of equal quality. Another comforter, we are told, is the phrase that's used. Another comforter. It's really hard to listening to or reading A.W. Pink, reading William Barclay, or no relation, or listening to David Pawson. Three of them, the three ones that I've listened to, read, and different things, each of them said this word is almost impossible to translate in the English language. It's so difficult, the phrase that John uses in this account. Another comforter. It's a word that was used at the time in about 4 or 5 instances. It was used of a witness that was speaking on your behalf, in your favour then, in a court of law, a witness. Someone who will speak in your favour when you're in court. It can also mean an advocate, that is someone who is speaking on your behalf in a court of law when you're under a charge where there is a severe penalty if you're found guilty. And so it was used for that, for a witness, for an advocate. It was also used for an expert to give advice in very difficult situations, a counsellor we would call it. Another instance, a fourth instance, would be on those occasions when in a time of war or battle, the soldiers would be discouraged or dispirited, and they would send in one, we would call it today, in a modern sense, a team talk. We've seen some teams, haven't we, go into the half-time tunnel at the end of the first half, very dispirited, can't get going at all. They come out after the team talk, and they're a new side, they're a different team. Well, not so much in a game now, but in a life-threatening situation, in a battle of war. When the soldiers were dispirited or discouraged, they would send in an almost inspirer to encourage the troops. So you can see it's quite a... That's what the original phrase was used for. When it was translated into our English Bibles, one of the earliest translations was a guy by the name of John Wycliffe. And Wycliffe translated it into the English word comforter. Now the trouble is, comforter has changed its emphasis of meaning today. For instance, we have a comfort blanket. We have a comfortor. So people don't go into a shop now to ask for a dummy, they ask for a comfortor. You don't say dummy anymore. But that's the phraseology and the emphasis of today. For instance, in one sense, it means someone to console who is mourning. That's the type of thing. But when Wycliffe translated it, it didn't mean that. Doubtless it had some form of meaning towards it, because later on in this discussion that Jesus has, he says to them, he assures them, I will not leave you as orphans. So this word comfort must have some thought, must have some degree in there of consoling, of encouraging, of lifting up, those type of things. That is the modern day emphasis of today. But really what it meant was this. It was meant to strengthen you, or to fortify you. And I think it's the Bayeux Tapestry that's got in that big picture that it's got there. It's got a line of soldiers, and behind them is the bishop. And the bishop has a sword in his hand. And he's prodding them in the back. And it says underneath, Bishop so-and-so encouraging the troops, comforting the troops. That's what the word originally meant. But it also has emphasis to care for those as orphans. It's no good telling someone who lost both their mum and dad when they've got children to say, pull yourself together and let's push on. There are times for that, no doubt. But really it is to console, to comfort, to assure. But here it means to fortify, come forth, to strengthen. I will pray the Father, and he will send you one like myself who will strengthen you. And then he says this, and he will abide with you forever. Now I am going. I have to go. But he's never going to leave you. And so he's speaking to the disciples about the situation that they are about to enter into. They are entering into the world where Jesus will not be with them in the physical form. He will not be with them. They knew when he sent them out 2 by 2, and when they sent out the 70 to go into the towns and villages, they knew that Jesus would come behind them. Each and every time he would come behind. They would go and prepare a place, and then he would come. So they always had that assurance. But here he is leaving them. But he gives them that double assurance. Most assuredly, he says, most assuredly, truly, truly, verily, verily, are the phrases that they use in the Authorized Version. Speaks in these terms. I will pray the Father, and he will give you one just like myself, and he will strengthen you, and he'll remain with you forever. Forever. It's a lovely term of assurance, isn't it? He has to leave them, but he's going to remain with them forever. I thought of that hymn that I think it's Brother or Sister Buffum wrote, or Elisha Hoffman, one of the, he abides, he abides. Hallelujah, he abides with me. And so this assurance that Jesus gives to them. Just to step on just a little bit. We'll come back to other verses, but just to step on just a little bit. Verses 21 to 23 speaks in these terms. Let me just turn to it, and then we'll get it right. Verse 21 says this, he who has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and make myself known to him. Judas, that's not Judas Iscariot, but the other Judas, said to him, Lord, how is it that you will manifest or make yourself known to us and not to the world? Jesus answered and said, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. The opening of the chapter says this, if you believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions, or many rooms, depending on what translation you've got. And if it were not so, I would have told you, I'm going to prepare a place for you. If I go, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where you are, where I am, there you will be also. The emphasis at the front end of the chapter is this, that he has a home prepared for us. That's the emphasis there. But in the meantime, we tend to think of him, we were watching, I think, yesterday, the Lake District and the Yorkshire Dales, or some program it was, about 8 o'clock last night. And he was talking of one of those dry walls up there in the Lake District and how they build it and construct it. And we have this picture of Jesus almost with trowel and cement and brick building these mansions or rooms up there in heaven. What is he looking for now? I go to prepare a place for you. But in the meantime, this is what's going to happen. Verse 23 says this, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. My Father will love him, and we will come and make our home with him. That word home, or I think in the Authorized abode, is exactly the same word as mansions in the front end of the chapter. And this glorious thought is this, is that before you come and live with me, I'm coming to live with you. That's a lovely little thought, isn't it? Before you enter into heaven and live with me for the rest of your days, I, or we, are coming to live with you. And you will be our mansion. You will be our room. I think it's in the book of Isaiah, the Lord says this, the heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the place of my rest? We sing that song, don't we? That there was no room at the inn in the Christmas carols song. He is looking for a room that he might rest in. And that room is you. Oh, come to my heart, Lord Jesus. There is room in my heart for you. There is coming a day when we will live with him. But in the meantime, with one who is just like the Christ of God, he is coming to live with us. Is there room in your heart for him? Is there room in your heart for him? Well, let's call it, I was going to say, let's call it quits. Church language, isn't it? Let's bring it to an end. What a wonderful thought. That of all the places that God could dwell in the tent tabernacle of the Old Testament, in Solomon's temple, in the temple of Ezra and Dor, I've forgotten the name of the brother that set it up now, I've forgotten his name. But Joshua was one and the other that was with him. That Ezra was involved in, or the temple that will be in the millennium with Ezekiel's temple that he saw, with all the things and all the rooms that are going on there, he still says, where is the place of my rest? Where can I abide? There is room in my heart, Lord Jesus. Room in my heart for you. Is there? Or will you say, like the innkeeper, there's no room today? And find a place to rest elsewhere. May God grant it to us that we can see what he wants for us in these days. If you love me, keep my commandments, and I will pray the Father, and he will give you another Comforter who will abide with you forever. Well,